Good evening, everyone. We are now in the book of Leviticus, chapter 2. Now, by way of review, I would like us to bear in mind that chapter 1 and chapter 2 connects with each other. So, as we take a look at chapter 1, where we completed this chapter yesterday, bear in mind that this is about bringing an offering, approaching God with an ola, and this is really about a free will offering, an offering where he comes by his own choice, that he's happy with it. And it could be a number of people sharing an offering. The burnt offering is called ola. It is a burnt offering because it is with regards to an animal. So offering is related to the idea of approaching God. And so the idea of offer is approach, and the offering is the gift. Offering is actually the word korban. It's spelled a few ways, which is okay as long as you understand. Korban and karaf. Let him bring, offer. And this is a very Eastern Oriental concept. When you come to visit someone, you would bring a gift. And so here we call it an offering, a korban. And in a culture where it is not acceptable if you visit someone, if you don't bring anything, much less when you come to approach God at the Ohel Moed, which is the tabernacle of meeting. And the tabernacle is a place where God dwells. The Ark of the Covenant is there, and God's presence is sitting on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, we had the description of a couple of things that I just want to remind us. It is a burnt offering, an offering made by fire. So we saw this as an olah. And then an offering made by fire. In verse 9, it is an ishe. But the final part I want to draw your attention to is the sweet aroma, which is the re'ak, ni ho'ak. And this is actually the smell of appeasement or satisfaction. And so when you burn the sacrifice with fire, when you bring, there is a smoke going up, and there is also the aroma of the meat being burned with the fat. The aroma that's going up is called re'ak nihoak, the smell of satisfaction. And you see that throughout chapter 1. This is about a free will offering that they would bring because they would have done something that affects their relationship with God, but it is not a punishable kind of an offense. For example, the example I gave yesterday was that if you are supposed to eat the Pesach meal, you're not supposed to leave it until the next day. And you happen to do that, but there is no punishment for such an offense. And so, in so doing, people would bring such an offering to God called a free will, a happy offering, an offering where you really desire to come to God, to make peace with God, and that smell that goes up becomes the appeasement. Now, if you remember in chapter 1, it would be from the larger animal. It will also be from the smaller animal. And at the end, from verse 14, there will be birds of doves or pigeons. And I had mentioned that the reason for the variety of Ola from the big animals, which is a male, the oxen, and then the small animals, smaller four-footed would be the ram and the goat or the male goat. And the ram, they would remove the horn for shofar, but it will still be burned. And then you have the birds. You have to remove the feathers and all the dirty stuff that is on the bird, and perhaps including the beak and the feet as well. Now, all of these are burnt as a free will offering. And in chapter 2, it continues this free will offering. But in this case, you find that it will be using grain or meal offering. It is fine flour. Now, what is fine flour? Fine flour means that it is flour that has been sifted, grinded, and sifted into its fine, finest powdery form. When it is not at the fine powdery form, it will not fly away. And so the word here describes to be very fine flour, grounded to its finest. So it's not just a grain offering, but it's literally a meal offering. When anyone approaches God, and since it is continuation from chapter 1 for a free will offering, then his offering, his korban, can be fine flour. It is flour offering. Now, this idea of fine flour, as I mentioned, that it is important for us to realize that it is made of the finest grinding of the flour. Now he will pour oil, and oil here is shemen, and will put frankincense on it. Now we're not familiar with frankincense, but the word itself already tells you it's a form of incense. Frankincense in the word here is lavona, lavona. It comes from the word Laban, which is the same name as the father-in-law of Jacob. And this word literally means white. And so frankincense is a form of white resin that when you burn it, it gives off white colored smoke. Now, what does that mean? I can't draw you white smoke, but basically, all you need to know is that these are raisins, like little rocks when it's dried up. And when it's burned, you would find that the fire, as it comes out, gives off what we call white colored smoke. Now, very hard to see unless I give you a background. Let me give you a background. And when it burns, it gives off a white colored smoke. And that is frankincense. The rule for bringing a meal offering to God as a present. Why? So we need to understand, if you are rich, you can have a bull. If you are less rich, you can bring a ram or a male goat. If you are even very poor, you can bring a bird, a dove, or a pigeon. And now in chapter 2, if you're really, 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 really poor, you can bring flour, but make sure that it is fine flour. Now, fine flour doesn't mean expensive flour, it just means that it's been grounded into finest powdery form. Then he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, the Kohen, the Kohanim. Now, bear in mind, these are sons, not daughters. The reason is that this role is only for the sons. The daughters have no part in the temple or tabernacle work. The priests, one of whom shall take from him, and then we have this expression, uh, his handful of fine flour, and this handful of fine flour comes from the word handful, right? It is handful, but it is hand by three fingers. Okay, it is important that we note that this is flour by three fingerfuls of flour. So basically, the handful means three fingerful. This is the Jewish tradition. So the idea of handful is not one fistful of it. It is three fingerful. So you dip three finger into the fine flour that is mixed with oil, with all the frankincense. Then that handful of flour is what you mix with oil and frankincense. Bear in mind, it is that much. That's all that you need to bring. Of course, there is remnant. Now, the remnant is given to the priests to use. But here, after you bring it, or this person brings it, the fingerful has to be taken by the Kohen and then mixed with oil and frankincense, and the priest will burn it as a memorial. Now, in verse 2, this would be a memorial offering. It's called a memorial offering, atskara. Basically, it means a little bit of the flour, and it is also burned on the altar. The burning is what is important. This idea of burning is to cause it to have smoke. Cause to have smoke. Remember, this is also a form of a burnt offering concept, except that you're not dealing with meat, but you're still talking about the smoke that rises up, and like an olah, like a burnt offering. And so it is called an offering made by fire. This is an ishe. And there is a sweet aroma. Remember, this would be the re'ak ni ho'ak. A smell of satisfaction, a smell of appeasement to the Lord. Is there a smell? Obviously, not because the flour, when it burns, have a smell, but the smell really comes from the frankincense that comes out as it's mixed with oil, and it continues to burn with a white colored smoke. And that is what it means by cause to have smoke. The rest of the grain offering, the rest of the fine flour, shall be Aaron's and his sons, meaning it goes to the Kohanim. Now we are told that it is the most holy. The word here is the holy of holies, the holiest of the holy things. This is what it means of the offerings. And the idea of offerings here would be the offerings made by fire. So, offerings made by fire is Ishe to God. So, God considers when you burn the fine flour with frankincense, it is the most special. Now, from chapter 1, we have covered the burning of the pieces of the bull, then the pieces of the ram or the male goat, and then the bird that's broken in at the wings of the dove or the pigeon. And now we are setting to fire the meal offering of 3 finger full. And God says, this one here that is made by fire is the most special of all. God likes this one better than everything else. Now, think with me. Why the fine flour? Why not the bull? The reason being is that when you are rich, you can afford a bull. If not, you can afford a ram or a male goat. If not, you would have some doves or some pigeons. But everyone will be able to bring fine flour. When you have no money, that would be at the very least you can. And in the justice of God, God doesn't see the richness of the person bringing a korban to God. God sees the fact that they are willing to come and God will be satisfied. All korban is good if you follow the rules that God has set. But in chapter 2, we are told that this particular korban, when it's made by fire, ishe, is the what it's called the Kodesh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies, the most special of all the Ishe that is being made up till this point. And that is important for us to understand. Now, going into verse 4, it says this. Verse 4 tells us if you bring as a korban. Now, these are the words that we may not be able to tell from the English. We can see this as a karef, and the goods that you bring as a karef is a korban. They are all related. As you offer, you come to see God and you bring some gifts. The gift is called the korban. The drawing near is the karef. They are from the same root word. If you come with a grain offering, a present that is made from grain, made from meal, and it is baked in the oven. Now, what does that mean? It means this: you come and you already have the fine flour, and the fine flour is baked in a furnace. Now, an oven is our modern word, but it's you have a, a mud hole that you put fire inside, and yes, that's the idea of baking, and you've baked it into what we call cakes, cakes, which is using matzah. Cakes means it is in a loaf and is using fine flour mixed with oil. Or you have matzah. All of these are baked in the oven. That is wafers. The idea of a wafer means it is thin. This would be loaf, bigger. So there are different styles. And then we have this word anointed with oil. Please bear in mind this word anointed is literally smearing, and it comes from the word mashak. Mashak. And that's where we get the word Mashiach, Messiah. And it is the anointed one. So you can anoint it with oil, you rub it with oil. But if your grain offering is baked in a pan, now a pan in this idea is a griddle, a shallow baking utensil. So you can think of it this way, it would be a shallow utensil. And so we call it a pan. It has to be fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. It's the same style. But when you do it in a pan, you find that it will be very crispy. And because it is crispy, then you can break it in pieces. The idea of break it into pieces means to crumble it. That is what it means. You crumble it and then you mix it with oil, and then this is your grain offering. This is your mincha, right? Your mincha. Now, we can see the protocol, right? If you have flour, then you put frankincense and oil on it. If you happen to bake it, then it could be a big loaf or a thin loaf, but it's matzah. It cannot be leavened. It has to be unleavened. But if you do it in a pan, then it will be very crispy. Then you're supposed to break it up. Now, we have in verse 7, you find that if your offering, and we're still talking about the korban, if your present is a mincha, which is made of meal, and it is in a covered pan. Now, in this covered pan, basically, it is really very much a sense of a deeper, and it's covered. It's like a pot. So one, we have a frying pan style, and it's crispy. And then the second one is you have it in a cooking pot style, and you do the same. You make it of fine flour with oil. You shall bring the mincha, the grain offering that is made of these things to God. So God is giving this protocol easy to follow. And then you should present it to the priest, the Kohen. He shall bring it to the altar. Nobody goes to the altar except the Kohen, the priest. And then the priest shall take from the mincha. Then we have this memorial offering. Remember, this memorial portion is really this handful, which is 3 fingerful. And that's all we're talking about. And burn it on the altar. Now we have in verse 9, again, this whole aspect is an offering made by fire. It is an ishe. It is a sweet aroma, and this would be a re'ak, nin ho'ak. A smell of appeasement, a smell of satisfaction to Jehovah. And then whatever is balance of the grain offering, it will go to Aaron and his sons, the Kohen. And then we are told it is the holy of holies. It is the most special of the offerings to God made by fire. Offering made by fire, it is the best of the Ishe, the most special. Again, these are all the meal offering, the mincha, which tells us that God cares for everyone. Everyone can do this. If you are so poor, you can do this. And God says, I like this the most. And now we come to verse 11. Verse 11 gives us some prohibition. In the mincha, which you come to God and you bring it as a korban, it shall be made with leaven. And this word no is put in front. The interesting thing is that we should read it is that it should be unleavened. It should be matzah. So when they bring grain offering, it cannot have leaven. Now you see this in the Pesach and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. God doesn't want leaven when it comes to sacrifices to God. You shall burn no leaven, and then no fruit honey. Do not add anything to it in any offering to the Lord made by fire, all the ishe. As for the offerings of first fruits, now we need to understand in verse 12, this is a korban of what we call the first of the produce. This is reshit. It is a korban reshit. Very much like Genesis 1:1, Bereshit. It is korban reshit. When you bring these kinds of first offerings to God, then you shall approach God, but they shall not be burned on the altar for a sweet aroma. The only things that is burnt would be the big animals, the small animals, the bird, and the mincha, the grain offering, which is a fine flour offering. And every offering of your mincha, you shall season with salt. You find that the pagans don't do that, but God wants it. God wants his mincha, the gift using the fine flour. It has to be with taste. And so salt is used as for taste. You shall not allow the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offerings, you shall offer salt. Now, the Jewish people would look at using particularly sea salt, where the salt water is evaporated and salt is harvested from the sea water. And that would be the kind of salt that they would be using for the seasoning. Now, the idea of seasoning in verse 13 uh, very much talks about to give what we call some taste, seasoning, rubbing it with salt, right? Seasoning, rubbing with salt. And so you add salt into the meal offering before it is actually offered to God in the fire. And it says, you shall not allow the salt of the covenant of your God be lacking, which means the same here. There cannot be any mincha, grain offering, that has no salt. There cannot be any mincha that is leavened. It must be unleavened. Right? That's how it should appear to God. Then it comes back to the first fruits. The first fruits now is given a name. If you offer a grain offering of your first fruits, this is not your first offering. This is the Bakorim. Whether it's barley or wheat, these are grains, right? These are the beginning of the fruits itself. These are the grain itself. This happens when they go into the land. Because while they are in the wilderness, there is no way to offer this. It says, you shall offer the grain offering of your first fruits, green heads of grain roasted on the fire, grain beaten from full heads. All of these tells us that as first fruits, they are to be selected. They are to be the best. They are not the any grain that comes out. They have to be selected to be the best of the first fruits of the grain, and then they are roasted over fire. And then they are beaten from full heads. These are new corns. Right? It's very important for us to realize that all of these are protocols. God doesn't want any simply plucked grain. God wants the best of what they have to offer. And in the same way, to put oil and then to place frankincense, white resin. When burned, you get white smoke, and it is has an incense, a scent that goes up. And this is the first fruits of the grain offering. This is a mincha. Remember, this is the mincha. And then the priest shall burn the memorial portion. What is the memorial portion? The memorial portion is actually the 3-finger full picked up by the priest. And of its beaten grain, part of its oil, and with oil, all the frankincense, it would be an offering made by fire, an ishe to the Lord. These would be the protocol. If you can bring a free will offering, an offering that you are happy with, you want to do that, it is not required, but you feel that there is a compulsion inside of you, not by law, not by others, but because you want to make peace with God for something that was unintentionally done, for something that was done that has no prerequisite of any punishment, but you feel that that offense is troubling you. And that is what chapter 1 and chapter 2 is all about. A free will offering made by fire. They're all ishe. It would be big animals, the ox. It will be smaller animals, the rams or the male goats. Take the horns away and use it for shofar. It would be birds that is broken at the wings. Then it could be mincha. It could be flour that either you bring it as is or you bake something with it. All of these could be seen in a household item. If you are existing within the tribes of Israel, at the very least, there will be something to eat. And that would be what God expects anyone for a free will offering. An olah for animals and meat burned with the fat, and for mincha, uh, which is grain in some form, whether baked in a furnace, baked over fire, whether it's thin, whether it's thick, it has to be broken down into a fine form and then added oil and then frankincense. This is what we mean by God's house, God's rules. If anyone wants to draw near to God and bringing a gift, the gift has to follow the protocol. You can't come with nothing. That's understood. But when you come to bring something called a korban, it must follow the rules of chapter 1 and chapter 2. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.